If you are a Helldivers 2 fan, I'm sure you've been keeping up with the news already. But it has been a roller coaster ride and a true fight for democracy for you Helldivers 2 players. So let's get caught up to speed on what's been going on within the Helldivers 2 community. Because that's something that just can't be looked over right now, with Helldivers 2 being one of the most played games so far, not only on Steam, but in the gaming world in general here in 2024. All right, Helldivers 2, if you don't know, is where you get along with your friends, or you can kill your friends. I would suggest teaming up with them. Fight for democracy by killing bugs. All right, and saving the planets. That is what you do. And it's pretty simple. Obviously, you can go more in depth within the game, but at its base level, that's what you do. Now, here's the thing that's been unique about Helldivers lately, though, is the fact that they came out with the game, and in a small disclaimer on Steam, they actually said that you would have to have a PlayStation Network account in order to play the game. Now, what makes this really interesting is when the game launched, of course, it didn't have this problem. They let it out for everybody. You didn't need to have a PlayStation Network account, and anybody could play. You didn't have to have it. It didn't matter what country you were from. It didn't matter any of that. As long as you had a PlayStation system or a PC, you could download the game, you could get it, play it, and have fun. Except for you Microsoft fans. What's interesting, though, is that in the Helldivers 2 community, the developer Arrowhead Game Studios was hoping, probably, that they could have enough community of you guys and the fans and enough democracy that PlayStation wouldn't push this through. Sony wouldn't care about necessarily forcing everybody to have a Sony account later down the road, and that democracy would stand up and there would be enough people in the community. But that didn't happen. Previously this weekend, we have seen that Sony took a stand and wanted to make sure that they implemented that in order to play Helldivers 2, that you would need to have a Sony account. Now, what makes this really interesting, though, is that Sony wants to do this, and I can understand why they want to do this, because they see Microsoft buying a lot of game studios and getting a monopoly on a lot of games in general. So this was a good chance for Sony to take advantage of Helldivers 2 and its success. The problem that happened, though, was they didn't initially start out with this. Even though it was in the disclaimer, they didn't enforce it. Later down the road is when they enforced it, once the community was brought in. And I can see why Sony would probably think, okay, now there's our chance to do it. It'll work out. Problem is, Sony and all their executives that just now thought about trying to enforce this rule of having to have a Sony account to play Helldivers 2, no matter the device that you play it on, they failed to realize that in their time of trying to make money, probably, right? That was their end goal, was let's make money by having people sign up and be forced to sign up if they want to continue and if they want to play this game at all in the future. They were so blindsided by money that they don't open up their eyes, see the entire picture, and realize that there is only 73 countries in the entire world right now that you can get a Sony account on, Sony PlayStation account on, and there is about 118 countries that you cannot get a Sony account on. And we can see that on this list here. Super interesting, right? This is not even an all-inclusive list. You can just see, this is what I typed in. How many countries can you not get a PlayStation Network? So this would affect 118 different countries throughout the globe that are playing Helldivers 2 that no longer can play Helldivers 2 because their country doesn't allow it. And instead of Sony trying to get into these countries, and I'm sure there's big reasons to why they haven't got into there already. That could be electrical issues, could be governmental issues, it could be all sorts of different issues. But instead of Sony fighting to try to get into those countries to make long-term money down the road and have more fans in general across the entire globe, they centralized trying to get greedy on one specific game, and it hurt them. But you, as a community, as a democracy, the true democracy fight in Helldivers 2 was standing up against the corporate greed and fighting back with the amount of backlash that the Helldivers 2 community gave, and were able to push back and have Sony declare that they are reverting back to their old way of not enforcing that you have a Sony account in order to play Helldivers 2, which is a huge W for the entire globe that is playing Helldivers 2. Because how many people couldn't play Helldivers 2 for a short span of time due to this predicament? Now, of course, like I said, Sony did have it in the disclaimer, and they were perfectly right to do what they did. But the fact that we as a community can stand together, be a democracy, just shows how powerful player base really can be, as long as they put their money where their mouth is. Like, hey, we have to have, and as long as we're vocal, we can get our way. And I think this is something that's really cool. Another interesting thing that's really just blows my mind is looking at the Steam charts, right? So this is what we're seeing since the max of it. This is what we can see this entire 6-month process. We can see that the entire Steam chart, of course, most games are always going to trend down. That's just a normal way of things, all right? But let's go to the 1 week. We see the 1 week, and we can always see the lows. We always see the lows, always see the highs, and we can see it down here, and it actually stoops a little bit lower for the past couple days, but it's still raised back up. And as soon as Sony announced that they took off enforcing it, is when we get to see one of the second best peaks of this entire week. We've seen it peak at the 120 on 130, 123, 125, and over here we've seen it peak again at 122. And throughout the rest of the week, it didn't even hit the 120s. Got very close, but it didn't quite hit. And an all-time peak of 122,000 players. This is super interesting information to see that it did take a dip in that time. And it went to one of the all-time lows just in the time that they announced that you would have to have a Sony account, to the time they reverted it. And I'm glad Sony was on top of this, and I'm glad that Sony was listening and was realizing in their strive to make a quick dollar that this wasn't the end game. So you guys keep fighting for democracy, because it's working, all right?